Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well known and respected author from Pennsylvania, USA, Mr. Richard Spegal. Richard, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Richard is an author and a storyteller. He's an author of trilogies Eternal Nights and Wolves and Ravens, and he has served as an officer in the PA National Guard. So, Richard, my first question before we come to your books, you served as an officer in the Pennsylvania National Guard and were connected with the 82nd Airborne Division. How did military life shape the way you think about loyalty, hierarchy, and moral ambiguity, which comes out in your fiction?
Being in the military has a way of removing a lot of pretense. You learn what it is to be part of a team and things like that. And I went in right after high school, and then after, like I said, after active duty, I joined the National Guard.
Hmm.
Uh, there was a little bit more of a balance between family life and military life, doing it that way. And it gives you a lot of insight when you're writing. You're able to do action scenes a lot more accurately and things like that. So
Hmm.
it's helpful in that respect as well.
Well said. You've said you began writing because adult fantasy readers were underserved. What exactly did you feel was missing from the genre that pushed you to write books you wanted to read?
Well, everything was missing. All books, all authors seem to focus on YA, young adult audiences, and I'm not like a 14-year-old girl. So I should have my own entertainment as well. But we don't really have that.
Hmm.
Not in the fantasy genre and in the people who are fans of vampires and stuff after Anne Rice, and that was a long time ago. I
Hmm.
mean, Anne Rice was a long time ago, but after her, there was really nothing, not for grown-ups anyway. So that's why I just started writing in those genres and geared
Fascinating.
everything towards a more mature audience.
Fascinating. Was there a defining personal moment when you decided you would not sugarcoat your storytelling?
Maybe after I finished my first term of service, when I realized that like sugarcoating it makes it fake, and
Hmm.
that's the mistake a lot of people, most people actually do. I want it to be realistic, so I don't sugarcoat the physical or the psychological sides of anything that my characters are dealing with.
Hmm. Both your series deal with forbidden bonds, vampires who love, wolves and ravens who must not unite. Are your stories ultimately about what happens when natural connection is suppressed?
Partially, I think that does come out more in Wolves and Ravens, since it's
Hmm.
actually like a center point of the entire story. Um, not as much in Eternal Nights. In Eternal Nights, it was more of like a standard, like they're already married. Like there isn't really anything forbidden about that. It's
Hmm.
just something that's relatable, and a little different to have characters that are like ancient vampires but also married.
Yeah.
The Wolves and Ravens is more of the forbidden love kind of thing.
Amazing. Across both worlds, love appears to be the one force that defies law, nature, and even demon influence. Is love your ultimate counterforce to darkness?
I think it works out that way. Maybe it didn't work out that way at first, but as I wrote more and more, it did kind of end up that way. Like Eternal Nights with them being married, it is really a love conquers all kind of story, even as weird and science fiction as it gets. The two of them being able to like stay together, and then in Wolves and Ravens, it's that way as well, even though it is like the forbidden aspect. But the two
Hmm.
characters, the audience knows. I mean, the audience can tell very easily that they're in love, and it's kind of like a will they, won't they kind of thing.
Hmm. Let's now come to your book or your series, Eternal Nights, first, before we come to your other one. In your Eternal Nights series, immortality is not romanticized, but treated as complex and burdensome. What philosophical question about eternity were you most interested in exploring? And give me an example if you can.
I guess the question would be how it would affect. well, like how it would affect the mind. They're vampires, but they were human, so they have the same brains that they
Mm.
had when they were human. But
Yeah.
now they're 900 years old, and we're not supposed to live that long. And it's not realistic to have the characters just act like normal people all of the time. Like
Mm.
they're gonna suffer just because of age. And then when the main series is published, they're going to be over 2,000 years old.
Mm.
And it affects the kind of people they are just because, like I said, we're not supposed to live that long. And it makes them get weird sometimes. Like they
Mm.
just can't control what they're doing or something because just time has like wrecked their brains.
Mm. Amazing.
Immortality is not a good thing, is one of the things that I put
Absolutely,
in there.
absolutely, absolutely. And we have this whole concept of immortality in some of our Indian scriptures as well, and that itself is also seen as not too good. Richard, my next question is that your portrayal of supernatural begins, of supernatural beings retains deep emotional consciousness rather than turning them into simple monsters. What does that say about your view of humanity?
I just think there's a lot of things that there's a lot of things that we can't necessarily explain. And when it comes to the supernatural, I don't like to take a simplistic approach. I also try to uh, eventually through the books, I try to actually give logical explanations for all of the quote supernatural beings because I think that even though they are supernatural, I like to give them a logical explanation because I think that helps the realism a little bit. And
Hmm.
you don't get that a lot in storytelling. People just sort of leave it up to the imagination because
Correct.
they can't explain it.
Correct.
I try to explain it.
Correct. But that must be require a lot of research, isn't it?
Yes. It requires a lot of research to make your explanations make sense.
Hmm.
And especially when it's not something you can research. Like I can't research what a vampire really is because they don't
Correct.
exist. So I
Correct.
had to make it up. And most people don't tackle the whole what is it? How do their bodies work? Et cetera, et cetera. I had to figure that out and make it make sense.
Hmm. Incredible. You also explored the tension between power and control, especially the idea of an inner beast. Is that metaphorical for something in human nature?
That wasn't necessarily my intention. I guess it could be viewed as that way. I was just trying to write it in the sense that vampires are inherent, at least in the beginning, when they're before they explore what they are. Vampires are inherently negative creatures, like they're bad people. But
Hmm.
my main characters are good, but they still have to fight against what makes them vampires,
Hmm.
and it's like a daily struggle that they have to be like eternally vigilant against.
Hmm. Hmm. And the concept of immortality, changing one's perception of time, appears frequently in your book. How did you approach writing characters who have lived for centuries, maybe hundreds of years, without losing the relatability of the character?
That's where the marriage comes in because you can't we might not be able to relate to extraordinarily old and powerful vampires, but most of us can relate to being married.
Hmm.
And as old and as powerful as they are, and regardless of the kinds of people that they are, as far as being married, they act like any married couple, like they bicker all the time. They're always annoying one another, and I think most people who are married can see like, oh yeah, yeah, that's exactly what my husband does, or oh, that's exactly
Hmm.
what my wife does. So I
Hmm.
think the relatability is in the relationship.
Hmm. Very interesting. There is a strong undercurrent of moral ambiguity in your series. Why are you drawn to stories where right and wrong are not clearly defined?
Because again, I think it's more realistic. Most of the world is a shade of gray, and that's why I have here, especially like we're talking about Eternal Nights. They're protagonists and they're trying to do the right thing, but they're not really nice people.
Hmm.
Especially in the main series when they're over 2,000 years old, they're not nice people at all. But they're still trying to do the right thing. It's
Yeah.
just the immortality kind of twists them into creatures that we would not consider to be typical protagonists.
Hmm. Well said. Let's come to your other series, Wolves and Ravens. The concept of forbidden union and its consequences forms a powerful thematic core. What were you exploring about societal control and fear in this book?
Well, in the first one, where the first one called the first law, where they're it revolves around the thing that you said, wolves and ravens had to stay apart, at least as far as being married or mating or anything like that. And I was exploring the concept of not everything that's written down is appropriate,
Hmm.
and then a lot of the thing, and then sometimes the right thing to do isn't written down. And historically, there's a lot of situations where people have decided that we're not going to obey what's written.
Hmm.
We're going to change it. And, it takes place in the forms of like revolutions in lots of countries over the world. And it
Hmm.
always works out better when
Hmm.
people aren't blindly following something just because it's written down.
Sure, sure. You depict long-standing wars where participants forget why they began fighting. Is this a reflection on human history?
I didn't intend it that way.
Hmm.
I came up with it as just like a nice way to start the book because the reader is introduced to the antagonist very very quickly in the prologue, so the reader knows kind of what happened, even though none of the races or characters in the books do. It was just a result of how powerful that character's influence was that he basically controlled the entire world's thoughts
Hmm.
back like a long time ago when they had their war.
Yeah, yeah. There is a strong theme of power imbalance between groups. Are you intentionally exploring social commentary through fantasy?
Again, that wasn't necessarily my intention. My intention was just for a very entertaining, complicated, because I think adults want complicated stories to make you
Hmm.
think. But it can be viewed that way a little bit because there's a lot of concepts about equality and things like that that
Hmm.
are taken a little too far
Hmm.
rather than I think that because there's three races in the book and they get along so well because they recognize their differences
Hmm.
and each race works in the area that they excel in. So it's a very harmonious situation
Hmm.
rather than a bunch of races deciding that they're perfectly equal in all things, that everybody
Hmm.
tries to do the same thing, but it doesn't work. But sometimes when we say things like that out loud, it can be taken the wrong way.
Hmm. The great accord in your world represents uneasy peace after devastation. What do you believe is necessary for true reconciliation?
I think for true reconciliation, people need to be able to face the truth. People need to be able to face the truth, work to their strengths, admit their weaknesses, and the Great Accord in the book was like it was an extraordinarily important thing because it signaled the end of the Great War. It's just the way it was written didn't make a whole lot of sense because again that was influenced by a demon. It's just none of the characters knew that,
Hmm.
but the spirit of it was for everybody to just, like I said before, everybody to just work towards their strengths.
Hmm.
Like the ravens would take charge because they were smarter, the wolves would protect them, but then the regular people, the race of man, there's so many more of them, they would be the ones that would actually inherit the land.
Hmm. Your female leadership figures are strong, strategic, and complex. How intentional was this choice?
Well, I have both in Eternal Nights as well with Danielle and in Wolves and Ravens with Chin. I do write very strong female characters. It was a conscious choice because well, she's the queen, so she's in charge, so she has to be female.
Hmm.
And female characters have been written very poorly, especially in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, they're
Hmm.
just absolutely terrible. Whereas Chin is written as a very realistic character. You're introduced to her when she's 7 years old, and you
Hmm.
follow her through her life, and she turns into this amazing character who's like probably one of the greatest queens of all time, but she
Right.
earns, and the reader gets to see her earn that through daily suffering as she's trained very
Hmm.
harshly.
Hmm. Amazing. I have time for two more questions for you, Richard. Given the amazing success you've had with both your trilogies so far, do you see a web series coming out for each of these?
That's something I never thought of. I'm not really a techie kind of guy. I just write this stuff. Some people have actually mentioned that to me, and that might be something that happens down the road. I do have a media company working on screenplays, and they're looking at like streaming services and stuff like that. So who knows down the
Who
road?
knows? Who knows? And good luck for that. And my last question for you, Richard. If readers walk away from your books with one lingering question about themselves, what do you hope that question would be?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess just if people were to walk away with one question about themselves, um, I think maybe like who they really are.
Hmm.
Like after having a chance to delve into like the dark recesses of like the psychological and stuff like that, I think
Hmm.
maybe people might ask questions about themselves.
Hmm. And on that note, I just want to say, Richard, what a fascinating conversation this one has been. I'm an author myself of 10 books, but I don't write fiction and certainly not a trilogy or two trilogies like you have done. Thank you for speaking to me about both your books or series, Eternal Nights and Wolves and Ravens. Thank you for sharing with me some of your thoughts as an author. Thank you again and good luck.
Yep. Thank you for having me. It's
Thank
fun.
you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.